Would you
Yeah.
like me to read out some of the chat questions and you can
Sure.
fill?
That would be great.
Okay, that's great. So I think that we left off with the bottling industry, and then we went, the next question came in. Do you think Vermont and Massachusetts have similar background soil values for PFAS? Is it appropriate to use Vermont values in Massachusetts? And I think Mark and Paul have looked at that a lot.
Yep. Yeah.
Yes. First,
Yep.
I think we would have similar values. What we're seeing in Vermont is due partly to atmospheric deposition. So what we would see in kind of that part of New England probably would not be much different from what we would see here. But in addition, we have had some very much smaller background studies done for particular sites in Massachusetts. One that comes to mind is in Barnstable, where we saw very similar levels. So while those data sets weren't large enough for us to point to and say that's definitive, they were supportive of the Vermont data.
Thank you, Paul.
The next question, Stephanie, is on slides 54 and 55. So maybe Laura, we can flip backwards a little bit.
Great.
On the PFAS and soil residual application graphs, why are the 20-year residual application concentrations not twice the 10-year application concentrations? And I think we have, we do have people who are certainly well qualified to answer this, but really what you're doing is starting at that blue line that goes across. That is your baseline. So for each of the sites, you already have an assumption that we're using an average concentration of what appears in the soil in Vermont. So if you look at each of those, the 20-year is double the application of what is added in the 10-year. So for example, if you look at Biosolid 10, you see there's a little bit of you have, it looks like somewhere maybe around 600 nanograms per kilogram as the starting point. And then you've added an amount that brings you just under that little curvy line. And then that same amount is added again in the 20-year increment. So actually there is that application rate that's a consistent application. It's just that we start with a baseline in the Vermont soils. I don't know if Jen Woods wants to add anything to that.
I thought that was very well done.
Oh. Let's see, we have a question. Will there be consideration of behavior of PFAS and residuals other than the 6 regulated in drinking water in the environment? Specifically, evaluation of the degradation / transformation of precursors to PFAS.
I'm wondering if Mark might like to comment on that.
Yeah, and I think that's
Rob,
that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And we're aware of the fact that there are precursors that may break down in the environment to the 6 that we're most concerned about and focused on. At this point, we don't have a good, robust set of data with concentration information about what the background levels are for all of those compounds and what the addition from the sludge might be. But it's certainly something that we're aware of and would like to try to consider going forward.
Stephanie, Andrea from USGS has added a comment. You may be aware of this, but New Hampshire DES and USGS have just started a project looking at New Hampshire background soil conditions, and USGS will be doing laboratory partitioning experiments using soils and biosolids. The information produced by this study may be useful for you, perhaps, ? So I think it will definitely be.
No, absolutely.
And I think, yeah. And we are aware of that. So that's helpful. I
Hi,
don't
this
know.
is Andrea. Can I comment quickly?
Yes,
Yeah.
please, go ahead.
Yeah, just based on the last bit of discussion, we are also going to be looking at precursors and biosolids, and that will also be included in our experimental setup. So that will be part of the study as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And depending on what the timeline is, we can talk offline whether you might have information that you want to convey or that will be timely to convey to this larger group during the course of this process. But we can follow up with you separately on that point.
Absolutely.
Great.
Let's see, we also have a question. Do PFAS behave similarly to other DEP studied compounds, for example, TCE, that can be used for transport analyses?
Yeah, I think the short answer is no. We could have a much longer discussion about that, but they do have some distinct properties that really differentiate their fate and transport in the environment from things like TCE.
Let's see, is MassDEP considering incorporating potential leaching of PFAS from applied residuals that would reduce the cumulative concentration? Incorporating the potential. Oh, is that the concentration in the soil because some is lost to leaching to the groundwater? Is that what, Mara, is that what you mean?
Yes, that's what I meant.
Mm-hmm. That's a Mark question.
It's open to discussion. You know, clearly there will be some loss, and by loss I mean mobilization from the soil that's applied from the residuals that are applied away from the point of application through leaching to groundwater and runoff to surface water. However, because the persistence of these compounds, they're not breaking down and being destroyed. So it's a possibility, but you know, then you start losing the potential for secondary impacts that don't relate directly to the concentration in the soil at the location of application. So pros and cons to considering that.
Janine Burke-Wells has asked, what was the justification for using reporting limit numbers even if they were non-detect? So I think that's in our analysis.
But
Want me
isn't,
to answer that?
yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry about that, Stephanie. Janine, thank you for the question. I think it's a way to present that analysis. I think everyone is aware that the value is not zero, but we need to represent, we're trying to make a visual to show that it is, the value is less than the RL, but it is not zero either. So we're visually in this representation attempting to show that data of those gray bars are somewhere between that level and zero. We just don't know where.
Right, and I was going to make a very simple comment, which is just that you're displaying the data. You're not noting that the gray bars would or wouldn't be used in some regulatory way in an application. You're just trying to show the data. Okay, and I can't see, Kathy, did something else come in?
There are a few more, probably 4 more in the chat, and then maybe you'd want to open it up for others.
Sure.
I think. So Natalie has asked, when you talk about using the main approach, are you talking about the overall framework of using a leaching model, or are you intending to more directly incorporate aspects of their methodology? I think that's a
good question.
Jen or Mark question.
Yep. Yep.
And I guess
You're gonna get
The only reason I want to start is that I can explain generally. So the accumulation in soil, that is one piece, And then I want Mark to speak to the next piece of there's two different parts here. So that's why we presented one option for accumulation in soil. So that is one part. So I'll let Mark.
Yeah, and I guess that's consistent with what I was going to say, which is we're looking at it as an overall framework, you know, as opposed to necessarily using the details of the analyses that they performed, but really focusing on the framework.
Okay, we have a question from MDAR. Are pesticide fate models useful for the assessments?
That is an interesting question, and I personally don't know the answer. Mark, what do you have?
And I would, yeah, I would say quite possibly, yeah. So that's a good point, and there may be some very useful information that we could get from those. So Hatz, I'll be in touch.
And then we have more additional information that's being developed. So thank you to New England Water Environment Association, who says the Water Research Foundation, or WRF, has an ongoing study, WRF 5042, looking at PFAS release from biosolids into the soils. So that's terrific. That's exactly the kind of information we're interested in learning about.
Yeah, and again, if that is something, I don't know the particular schedule for that study, but as that data becomes available, we certainly would like to introduce it into this process, and we can follow up with Nuea offline on that. And I think they've made us aware of that study in the past. Great.
And we had also a couple more related to additional information. Jennifer from Nuea has suggested that we contact Anthony Druin, I don't know if I got his name right, at New Hampshire DES regarding their work with the Prism, which is a pesticide model. And then we have, I think, a couple more questions from Janine Burke-Wells, and then maybe we can open it up for discussion, but maybe not, because we have another chat. So let me just read Janine's question. Have you considered that the PFAS concentrations in residuals over time will decrease due to source reduction? What is MassDEP doing with respect to IPP programs? Thanks. That's the first question, and then we'll go to the next question that Janine had.
Kathy, this is Lel.
So Lel, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I can take that question. So,
and Lel, before you start, can you just define, when we talk about IPP, what we mean there?
Yes, so industrial pretreatment programs is the term that's being referred to. And there is an EPA program that is for industrial pretreatment. We've coordinated with their pretreatment coordinator. We also have regulations involving pretreatment. And while we certainly hope that there will be sources that will, that the sources will reduce over time, it's an involved process to try and get at those. So we have partnered with both EPA and the Office of Technical Assistance, and I believe the acting director of that program, Office of Technical Assistance, is on the call, Tiffany Skogstrom. They've been very helpful in helping us to identify facilities. The ones we are focused on currently are those upstream of drinking water, and offering to them some technical assistance to the municipal wastewater treatment plants that would help to identify industrial sources coming into the treatment plant and be able to potentially work with the industrial user to reduce those. We've asked or required that municipal wastewater treatment plants also work with their industrial sources. And so unfortunately those are the pathways that we're approaching, but it's something that will take some time and willingness. There is some, the sources, or the services rather, are confidential. Tiffany, if you're on the line, do you want to add anything to what I said?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I joined, I was on another PFAS webinar, so I joined back just in time. So
Perfect.
thanks for that kind introduction. Yeah, so OTA staff provides free and confidential technical assistance to all Massachusetts toxics users. And for the last few years, we've been trying to identify who might be using PFAS. So we're very happy to actually put that knowledge and suspect to use. So this week, OTA staff began sending letters to those potential users of PFAS to let them know about the new regulations that are may impact them, which includes, as of September 10th, the Massachusetts Toxic Use Reduction Act incorporated 172 PFAS chemicals that were adopted or are listed in the toxics release inventory of EPA. So we're helping companies identify if they're using them or think they may be using any PFAS. We've created a supplier notification template letter so we can help them get in touch with their chemical suppliers and just try to help them identify if they're using it. And also if they're not using PFAS, there may be potential for us to help them with other chemicals of concern. And all of this is confidential and voluntary. And so we're thankful to be introduced, by, another agency also helps us get site visits. And so we're offering virtual site visits to the companies. So hopefully we'll have some new friends soon. So thank you for that.
Okay, I'll keep reading. I'm still on Janine Burke Wells's question, but I should note that further down in the chat, she notes that NEBRA has experience with the Prism model. Her next question, though, is what was the name of the model used to come up with for main screening standards?
Yeah, so they used sea soil was the model for the leaching analysis. And then it was coupled with another model for the groundwater dispersion. Sorry, I'm not remembering the specific name of that model.
Was it AT123D?
There you go. Thank you.
There's teamwork for you. Okay, so Jen Peterson has a question. Jen represents the Massachusetts Waterworks Association. She says, you premised the discussion by saying you recognize that there are already residual disposal issues in the region. Any discussion about PFAS standards for residuals will further complicate their disposal. Can you expound upon what DEP is doing to address the existing issues? You mentioned the Nuea work, but I am not familiar with that. So one thing is, I think we're fortunate to have Nuea in the meeting today. And so I don't know if Jen is able to unmute and give us a quick snapshot of the study.
Sure, thanks. We're working with NEBRA on a study for sludge disposal. NEBRA will be surveying the entire country regarding aspects of that. Nuea is going to work within our member states, which are the 6 states within New England and New York. And we're going to, as Kathy said at the beginning, build that baseline of information regarding amount of material that's disposed, where it's disposed of. And we do understand that there are stressors on the system right now. I run the residuals work group within Nuea, and Jennifer Wood's a member of that. We have a lot of discussions regarding potential issues that are coming up. NEBRA has also met with us to discuss that also. So I don't know if that's enough background information or if you have further questions regarding that.
Oh, thank you, Jen. And I should note that I believe that the study is using the same methodology that was used by NEBRA for a study done with the Clean Energy Center a couple of years ago, specifically for Massachusetts. And so this takes the Massachusetts methodology and applies it more regionally.
That's correct. And it also will allow us to compare to a study that NEBRA had done in the past and look at the changes over time.
Thank you.
And I would add, Kathy, beyond that to Jen's question, you know, we certainly have engaged with different, you know, regions of the state and specific communities thinking about sludge disposal. We, you know, if there are proposals for projects, for example, we provide a lot of very detailed technical assistance on that. And, you know, some state legislators have led discussions on, particularly in the western part of the state, on, you know, water infrastructure issues that have actually included sludge disposal. And we've been pretty deeply involved in those discussions. So, but I think your question is maybe getting at, well, what else are we going to do? How are we going to figure out this issue? And I think, you know, we are open to that, identifying more ways to focus on it as part of this process.
Stephanie, could I add just a couple of thoughts to that?
Sure, love.
We are also, you know, sort of bringing up the capacity issue because as we consider what an appropriate regulatory standard might be, and we gather data about, you know, the concentrations in residuals, we're trying to better assess what the impact to the market might be. You know, so there's a lot of moving parts to this. And that's also one of the reasons why we believe that the industrial pretreatment program and the assistance that the Office of OTA is providing are important components of this, because in any ways that we can reduce, you know, the sources will help with the impact ultimately to any part of the current residuals that could not be potentially used in the future by a regulatory standard.
Thank you, Leldon. And I'm just trying to catch up with the chat here. Kathy, you may be ahead of me to see.
Yeah, we're at Eric's comment, which he logged in at 3:25, if people are following along. So he says, when considering these conservative assumptions and approaches like Maine used, it is important to understand the unintended consequences that may detrimentally impact the agricultural community in these beneficial reuse programs, sequestering carbon and other environmental benefits that may be lost. So conservative isn't always to the benefit of the communities we all serve.
I would say, you know, generally that's an important point, that all of this is balancing different aspects of environmental protection and, you know, things like greenhouse gas reduction, other environmental goals that we have. So I think that's a point that's well taken. But I don't know if Mark or Jennifer wants to say anything more specific about the assumptions that Maine used and how we might be considering those to the point that Eric is making.
I think those are important considerations. So certainly noted.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I see, actually, Kathy, I got the chat here in front of me. I can see that Janine Burke-Wells is asking, have we looked at other states' residuals and PFAS programs, including Michigan, Wisconsin, others outside New England? And I know we have looked at Michigan's work on residuals, and I believe we've looked at Wisconsin's work on other media, but I would invite others on the DEP team to expound on that if they want to.
I guess I'd like to make a comment that MassDEP is very thankful to the Nuea work group, and that group has expanded. We're very thankful that that group has been able to actually take on residuals from the entire representatives from the country. So it's been kind of amazing to have a place where these discussions can happen. So yeah, this is actually a conversation that is beyond just Massachusetts.
Okay, and I
Stephanie,
think,
you want to keep reading?
yes, sorry, Kathy.
No,
Yes,
that's
and
good.
I'm on a roll here. I've got it right in front of me. So I see Jen Peterson's following up, I believe, about the Nuea study, saying, is the cost of disposal being looked at in the study? We hear that costs have more than doubled for some municipalities. And my understanding is that cost is being looked at, but I don't know if the representative from Nuea wants to say more on that.
You have it covered, thanks.
Okay.
Jen, can you just repeat what you just said? I don't know if it was clear.
Sorry, I spoke rather quickly there. I said you have it covered, and
Okay.
we're not sure whether, what responses we'll get, but that's obviously an aspect that we're concerned about also, and we'll be looking at.
Okay, and I'll just note at the bottom here, Janine Burke-Wells just chimed in on that point, and is saying that NEBRA, WEF, NACWA, and CDM Smith have recently completed a cost impact study, and I think that's something we would definitely be very interested in seeing. Okay, so it's in draft. So Janine, we'll follow up with you offline to figure out whether or when that might be information that could be shared with this group. And then one question I skipped over, expanding on a prior question that Wendy Hager-Bernays had, are you considering looking into PFAS beyond the 6 compounds, both short and long chain? Are you considering regulating as a class or a subclass? And I might let Mark talk about this a little bit in terms of, the technical information that is sort of the underpinning of the regulations that we've promulgated so far, which are based on the 6 compounds, but certainly we're collecting a lot of data beyond that. But Mark, do you want to expound on
Yeah,
that?
our starting point here is based on the MCL and MCP standards for the subgroup of the 6 compounds that are covered in both of those regulations. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to ignore everything else, but as we get away from those compounds, the data limitations and challenges with respect to establishing screening levels gets quite a bit more severe, more limited. So we are, as part of the monitoring program, the testing requirements for PFAS and the biosolids, looking at a larger suite of those compounds, and we need to get a better sense as to what concentrations we're seeing and how variable they are to identify potential priorities for future action.
Okay. And then I see a question from Phil Guerin, which is, what is the time frame for moving PFAS residuals limits forward? I worry that there's a lack of field data available on which to base sound decisions. This group wraps up in January. There are studies underway, but Massachusetts is not ready to advance residual limits. We should focus on well-informed but reasonable interim limits and adjust up or down when we know more. There is a lot at stake. So Phil, I think you're making a good point and making it well. And I think what you said at the end of your question is reasonable interim limits. That is where we think we're going to end up, is to have interim screening levels and then to continue to absorb the science and continue to think about the approach and refine it. So we are sort of entering this discussion with the premise that we are planning on having some interim screening levels, but that won't be the end of our research or consideration, and that we would anticipate that we would refine our approach based on all of the information that's being developed and all the learning that we're doing and all the data that's in the process of being collected that we then need to analyze and understand. But I will stop and see if others want to expand on that point. But I generally think, we agree with the heart of what you're saying there. Janine is noting another compilation of models related to PFAS leaching and runoff that WEF and NACWA did a sort of a compilation of models, it sounds like. And if we haven't seen that, and Mark, Mark or Jennifer would have been the likely folks on our team who would have, we will follow up with you, Janine. I'm not sure if that's something that we've seen. Arcadis is the author, I see.
Yeah.
And then, go ahead, Mark.
We are aware of that and do have a copy. So it is part of the literature that we are reviewing and looking at. But thanks for the reminder. Yep.
Okay. And Mickey Nowak is offering some very practical information about costs right now. Haverhill old sludge disposal contract price was $85 per wet ton. The new contract is $120 per wet ton, a significant increase. That's my editorial comment at the end there. Springfield old sludge disposal contract price was $95 a wet ton. The new contract $120 a wet ton. Those are two examples. That computes to a $1.2 million a year, I think, increase for Springfield. I think yes, that's important information to consider. And then I see the chat is moving. A year, okay, annual increase. Thank you, Mickey. Eric from Nuea is saying in the multi-organization study that Janine referenced, we've seen an average of 40% increase in sludge and use costs. However, that is in today's climate and does not account for when other states catch up and stop accepting sludge from Massachusetts and the other New England states. I would encourage involvement from the landfill folks at DEP to consider the impacts on the municipal solid waste market if sludge was competing for landfill capacity. And so we do, that is a good point. And we do have our Bureau of Air and Waste, solid waste staff are part of our PFAS team. And so I'll just make a comment, we have 4 bureaus at DEP, planning and evaluation, air and waste, water resources, and waste site cleanup. 3 out of 4 are represented in today's meeting, but air and waste is also part of the discussion. And so we meet every week, the 4 bureaus and our 4 regions working on PFAS issues. So yes, that's a good point, and we will consider to bring that, continue to bring them into this discussion, and perhaps even as in one of our future sessions, we can delve into that issue. And then I see a question here from Jen. And you know what, I'm going to read Jen's question, and then after that, maybe we can take down the presentation, which might make it easier for people who want to, orally offer comments. And I'm going to just add a little bit of framing questions. So, but Jen's question, this is Jen Peterson from Mass Water Works. Since I am on the drinking side, I am not familiar with IPP options. Do you envision that an industrial user would have to install granulated activated carbon ion exchange, PFAS treatment at their facility to treat and remove PFAS before discharging? Are there funding programs available to support those expenses for businesses? So I think what Jen is, let's see. All right. I think Jen is getting at, what might the treatment be for wastewater? And Leldon is commenting, the first goal when working with industrial users is to reduce or eliminate the use of the compounds. OTA is able to help industries identify their use of products containing PFAS, which the industries sometimes don't even recognize as containing PFAS. Treatment would be the second tier of options, right? And that's all true. But I don't, are there funding programs to support those expenses for businesses? Not that I can think of, but I'll pause in case others do. When it comes to, adding treatment infrastructure at a facility, depending on the ownership of that facility, that is something that, our state revolving fund could assist with for public facilities. But I'll pause to see if anybody else wants to offer comments on that. And maybe at the same time, Laura, maybe you could take down the presentation just to make it easier for us to interact.
I think, Stephanie, there are some private companies that generate residuals that are land applied, but there
Right.
probably are not a lot. So that might be something where we could even target, it's totally voluntary, of course, but help match make the industry and the services of the Office of Technical Assistance. So,
Mhm.
we're looking at a fairly small subset of industry when we're talking about land application of the residuals.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so sort of stepping back a little bit, I mean, this has all been helpful. I feel like we've had some good discussion in the course of talking through the questions and great resources that people are raising. But I would invite people, if you have reactions to the information that we've presented today, we'd love to hear that. Some people are already reflecting their perspectives on these issues. We're interested in hearing that as well. And you know, we presented certain information today. We're going to tell you about what we plan to do in the next stakeholder meeting, the type of information that we plan to present. But if there's something that you think is missing from the process, you know, you could tell us that too. I mean, basically it's open. And I think I see a nice sympathetic comment from Janine that I'm tempted to read. I do not envy your job. Tough balancing act when considering sustainability and meeting the Commonwealth's organic recycling and climate change goals. Thanks for including us in this discussion. Thank you very much for that comment. And I would say that that tough situation is sort of what our role is often in the public sector, where we're trying to balance different values, but we feel it's really important to strike the right balance. You gotta consider all the different angles and hear all the different views of experts and all the stakeholders. So is there anyone who hasn't gotten a chance to offer questions or views who would like to speak now? And I guess maybe Laura or Kathy, you can help me identify if someone's raising their hand and I can't hear or I can't see.
Well, I do see that Becky Weidman has asked a question, although not directly related to today's discussion. Is MassDEP considering the development of surface water quality standards for PFAS? So that would be for discharges to surface waters.
Right. And we talked about, I think I talked about in the beginning, you know, there is not a national effluent standard, and we don't believe, EPA has not indicated that they are planning to develop one anytime soon. So we eventually will develop a surface water quality standard, but we do not have a time frame for that. And I want to emphasize that when we embark on that, that will also be a full and open process similar to this one. We talked about, you know, the requirements in new NPDES permits to collect information, you know, sampling wastewater to begin to characterize the incidence of PFAS. But right now we do not have a schedule for developing a surface water quality standard.